The Business of AI podcast, exploring how businesses are using AI to build services and tools, transforming organisations and delighting consumers. Produced by UKAI and hosted by Tim Flagg. AI is our business.
Welcome to another episode of the Business of AI podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Coyle from Drutek. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, very good today, actually. Thanks. Despite the sweltering heat here, I've got the fan on. Hopefully, you can't hear that in the background, but it's keeping me cool. But it's great to have you here, and let's get into the sort of get started by hearing a bit about your background. So I'm fascinated to understand how you got to do what you're doing today. So tell us your background.
Okay, so my background, I suppose, is a little unconventional, but then again, which background is conventional? I'm originally from Liverpool and moved to Manchester. So that's a big no-no, I suppose, Scouser in Manchester. And I went to Manchester University and I studied physics and I never left. Absolutely adore Manchester and still do. One of the best cities in the world. I've been here now for 21 years, which makes me feel old. And seen rapid transformation within Manchester in that time. You won't believe like the skyscrapers that are going up and the growth that has been happening at Manchester. I originally started making websites for celebrities. I started my business just as soon as I came out of university. And I would do websites for people just on daytime TV, that sort of thing. And then moved into politics. So I started to work for politicians. I worked for an MEP when we still had MEPs. I don't know if that's going to age me as well. And I did, various campaign websites for various different politicians of all stripes and sizes. After then, I then went into healthcare and started contracting for healthcare, and got a lot of contacts in medcoms, medical communications, and ended up starting Drutek, properly starting Drutek around the 2012, 2013. Drutek properly started. I registered the business in 2011, but wasn't really doing too much with it until 2011, 2013. And started consulting with front-end work for pharmaceutical companies. Main client then was Pfizer. You might have heard of them. They were one of our biggest first clients. And really got into that, really got into creating user experience and front-end software.
Great. Well, thank you. And in terms of what you're doing now with Drutek, it would be great to understand where that sits and how you've really sort of started to bring in AI-powered tools and services into your core proposition that you offer to your customers.
Yeah. So the major transformation for Drutek to pivot to AI started in about 2022. As I said previously, we were creating design systems for people. And if people don't really know, a design system is essentially a suite of settled decisions about how your user experience works. And that is manifested in either a component library, like a design, an actual design, or just conversations about when we look like this, our buttons look like this, our cards look like this on our websites. And all of that context becomes a design system. And then what's interesting is as we started to look towards when LLMs started to get a bit bigger in 2023, we realized that context was paramount in creating software with LLMs. And one of the vital pieces of infrastructure of context to create things that don't look vibe coded, that look thoughtful, and that has actual implementation decisions in it is the design system. You use that design system context with an artificial intelligence, you get tremendously better results. So that's what we do. we help companies create design systems with artificial intelligence to accelerate their user experiences.
So you're using the word context there, which is a really interesting word that I want you to kind of unpack a little bit, because lots of people will understand the sort of the meaning, the broad meaning of context. A bit more information, it gives you the background to understand something. Within large language models, we talk about the context window. So when we're sort of putting in when we're using a large language model, it will have almost like a memory for understanding all of the things we've asked in the past, and there's a certain space that it can contain that information that helps to make the prompt that goes into the LLM more effective. So I'd love to understand how you define context in terms of what you're doing here within the design system, because it feels like it's going to be much more than just those kind of examples.
Yeah. If you give Claude Code right now an instruction, and that instruction will say, make me a beautiful website for my hair salon, it will do that. Then you do that again and again and again. And more than likely, because of the non-deterministic nature of the LLM, you're going to get many different results. Now, there was a big thing, and it probably is still a big thing, a while ago, where we had prompt engineers, and they would create these really audacious scripts where they would say, "You are you're a fundamental, you're a principal front-end engineer. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this," and that's great. But often it's quite contrived in the way that it's done. Now, in terms of a design system, the way in which we create context with that is we capture our decisions, and these are human-made decisions, and we put that down and represent that in our designs or in documentation. And that is used so that other designers, humans, we're talking about humans right now, can create something that is like the design system and we can get many of those designers. You give them the same context and they'll create the same thing, because that's the purpose of the design system. We want to be able to follow that brand. We want to be able to have that consistency. We only get that consistency if the documentation and the specification is correct. And the same thing works with LLMs, surprisingly enough. If we get that documentation, that specification and context just right, and we do it in a way that is easy to understand and can be reproduced, we can get very similar results from generating components or a design from multiple different models, which is fantastic. And even different harnesses, we can make it strong enough. So we're using Claude Code, or we're using Codex, and if we provide the design system context well enough, then we should still get a reasonable attempt at the design system components and limiting that probabilistic nature of it. That's not to say that the probabilistic nature of LLMs are bad. In fact, that's one of the best things about them sometimes, to have that. But it really does help create things, again, that take you from a vibe coder to an agentic engineer.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So you talked before about all those decisions about the customer journey, which as a graphic designer, as a UX designer, someone who's passionate about the customer journey, you're thinking about how all those things can be optimized across lots of different examples. And it's almost remembering those decisions that have been made. I wanted to zoom in on a couple of examples though. And when you were talking, it kind of made me think of, well, I jotted down 3 things. One, the graphic design side of things, right? And I've been playing around with Claude Code, and it's been making different web pages for me. They all seem to have the same design format. In some ways, that's not bad. But then the other day I was making one, and I really wanted to have it be a bit bolder, a bit more ambitious. And it took a bit of figuring out how to make it unlearn what it's learned. But then I was also thinking from a conversion rate optimization perspective, from a marketing perspective. It's been a while since I've looked at this, but that you'd always be thinking about, do I make my button bigger? Do I have the benefits down here as bullet points? Do I have those at the top, or the call to action, all those kind of marketing-y type things for conversion rate optimization? Maybe accessibility as well, kind of aligning with the AAA standards and having all those things built in. Are these the types of design decisions that you're talking about? And could you give us a few examples to help bring it to life?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you brought in accessibility, because this is one of my primary passions, is ensuring that the web is usable by everyone. Even if on paper it doesn't actually seem economically viable, I think it's absolutely paramount for us to do that. And artificial intelligence should provide that. Now, to help create and harness this context, I've been working on a framework and an application called Spectral, and I'll be talking about this probably on LinkedIn a bit further as it comes out of private beta. But this tool enables people to be able to create components through a specification and also have a deterministic flow through various gates, such as accessibility checks and browser checks, to make sure that it's up to industry standards, but it's also up to your internal corporation standards as well. And they're the deterministic gates that you need when you're creating agentic powered software, which is why just creating something with Claude Code can give you great looking results to begin with, but not always ticking every box, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do, absolutely. It's interesting when you were talking about components. That reminded me of a conversation I was having about Lovable the other day, with someone from Lovable, and they were telling me that they're trying to replace software as a solution, platforms and CRMs, and they're doing a fairly good job at kind of pushing that narrative out there. And one of the things I was discussing with them was the opportunity to create a marketplace. So in the same way that we see that for open source code and big code repositories, creating components that could be positioned in a marketplace. So rather than having to vibe code your website or your app from scratch, actually you create a component part and you put it into the marketplace on Lovable, and then someone else can come along and they can kind of bolt together some components and get Lovable to do the work to pull them all together. Is that the sort of thing you're sort of talking about when you're saying you're creating these component parts? You're going to make them available for people to use within a more kind of these design systems?
Yeah, typically what would happen is within an organization, they'd use they'd use something called inner sourcing. So you've heard of open sourcing, where it's open to the world. Now, inner sourcing is where it's an open source philosophy, but within a corporation. And then they would be able to use those design system components across the entire company to be able to create materials and to create applications that are representative and consistent with the company's brand. And tools like Spectral that I'm creating, and there's other ones available as well, which help create those in a more considered way. Now, in terms of open sourcing these things, many companies do that as well. There are many different open source design systems available, such as there's Adobe Spectrum. There's loads. There's loads. I can't actually reel off the top of my head. I should be able to, but so that is available as well. But oftentimes, what I've noticed is that companies really want to create their own, and they want to create their own stamp on things, but it's expensive and bureaucratic as well. Design systems are an expensive thing because they require human consideration, which means a lot of human time. And that's quite right as well, because the first thing that you see when you see someone's website application or printed materials is that consideration. You're judging them on that. If it looks sloppy, then you'll think that company is a sloppy company. And that is what's happening sometimes with vibe-coded applications, that there's not as much consistency in the way that these things are created. So it reflects badly on the company as a whole. But that needn't be the case. We can still get the acceleration because we can reduce the amount of time that we're creating in the code side of it, because code can be created at the speed of thought. But we can take that time, not save as much time as we were going to if we completely vibe coded it, but use that for extra human conversation that we wouldn't have had the time or the resources to be able to do and create thoughtful, considered applications.
Yeah. And it's sort of emerging in my head as we talk that it's almost like a design and UX set of guardrails. So within the systems which people are experimenting with and creating now, whether that be just a standard LLM or a code platform or an agentic platform, people are playing around with these, but they're not really thinking yet about some of these design decisions that you are. But when they get there, you created these guardrails that enable them to plug those guardrails into those systems to ensure that they get to a much better design output, customer journey, and therefore commercial outcome than they would have done if they were just kind of doing it from scratch. And then it allows them to do that build rather than buy, because you're empowering them. I wanted to kind of bring you in on this concept. We were talking before a little bit about the democratization point here within organizations. I mean, typically that's what we've seen over the last sort of maybe 10, 15 years, is that people now have got many more tools to play around with, and it's often sort of marketers and techies who pioneer that. But how has it sort of changed over the last couple of years that you've seen in terms of the AI powered tools being able to empower people to do more?
I've seen some fantastic things. That's really warmed my heart with some of the ways in which people are using artificial intelligence to be able to create solutions. For example, I worked with people in a co-working place a couple of years ago. I sat down with them, and these were non-technical people by traditional standards, and they were there in Cursor creating applications for themselves to create a living for themselves. And these were people that were traditionally marketers. They may be just secretaries. These were people that had a non-technical background, but those barriers are falling. And that's just on the small scale. What I've seen as well within corporations that I've consulted with, that they've started to be able to also invite more people in out of the cold and get people to have a stake into what they're building. And there's many ways that they can do that, but the ways that I've been advising people to do that has a few steps. The first step within a company is to change the culture a little, so that you embrace everyone's ideas and you identify the problems that exist in a company and sketch them out, and you send that as a call to arms to the company. You say, we've got this problem. We've got this problem with our finance software. We've got this problem here. Does anyone know how to do it? And then enable everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean the people in C-suite who don't get to code, although they really want to again, and then all the way down to the secretary, to people like that. Enable them and give them the tools to be able to create. Evaluate those decisions. So bring them back in. So, and you look at those, the technical teams and everyone else looks at these decisions, and you'll see amazing innovation come from such unlikely sources. The people that are usually non-technical will approach things with lateral thinking that will just make geeks like me just, oh my God, I never thought of that.
Yeah.
Then integrate them. So once you've got those, then you need to put on your corporate hat and you need to start thinking about security, the way that you build it, technology and platforms that you can support, but you still harvest those ideas. And then finally, the last thing about that, and this is where people get things wrong, is then also empower your actual development team to use AI to then create the polished version of that. People, for a lot of things now, we shouldn't generally be hard coding or hand coding things. It's a tremendous waste of time with the way in which we've got GPT 5.6, we've got Fable. Often, and this is probably a hot topic, they are good enough, and they are very good. And with the harnesses like Claude Code, they are very good. We don't, for a lot of things now, need to be sat there with NeoVim open or something in a terminal flashing and us writing every single character. We don't need to do that. Make sure our professional development teams are embracing AI as well. And there's going to be some resistance with that with some people, and I've felt that. and I understand that.
Mm.
Because often the LLM will return some code that might not be quite as how they would have written it, but it's getting so good, and already it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that design process that you talk about there, that's open to the entire organization, that sounds great. Because as you were talking about it then, I thought, yeah, oh yeah, because the more people we involve in this process, the more perspectives, the more lived experience, more even just the small conversations they might have had that morning with a customer or someone who could be a potential customer, they were able to distill that experience, those insights down into a proposition, which before they wouldn't have maybe had the confidence to show anyone, but now they can take it, make it, use an AI powered tool to create it into a web page or a product or a service or an idea, whatever it is, really easily. And okay, that might not be the final product you're going to ship, but at least it's an idea, which then you bring that together for all of your organization. You've got this really rich set of ideas. What's better to work with than those kind of rich ideas? And then you talked about that funnel, and I was seeing your guardrails that you created, your design decision guardrails, as being the sort of the guardrails literally on that funnel to enable you to get to the bottom of that funnel and the really good stuff quicker.
Yeah, we honestly, if we do that with large organizations, we will see some fantastic innovations of which we never would have dreamt of before, because it has been there has been quite a lot of walls and barriers that we've created around the product development lifecycle. Even between we always used to say that design would throw things over the wall to engineering, and that's in our little box, but there's a box outside of that box that we don't even see, and these are people that have no idea how the software is actually made, and that's not necessary anymore. We all have the opportunity to become technical now, and we all have the opportunity to do it, and it's one of the things that I think that will distinguish a good company from a great company. And smaller companies using this methodology can really punch above their weight.
And just to reiterate, that methodology you're talking about, can you just articulate it in a very simple sentence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I call it the harvest framework. And it's the key points are identify your problems, enable everyone to use it, evaluate the solutions, integrate them, and then finally use AI to make those solutions.
Amazing. Thank you. That was a really good way of being able to look at it. So that's a great sort of process there to be able to try and bring all of that, all those insights together. Just to change tacks slightly, because I know that you also have an office in the US, and one of the big areas that we often find talking to UK businesses is the opportunity to get into the US. So I'd love to get your thoughts on how you got into the US, what that was like, and maybe some of your thoughts around how competitive the UK is for businesses versus the US. Because the other thing we hear from many businesses who scale is that they're often told by their investors they have to move to the US. Because of the talent, because of the investment, because of the size of the market, all those kind of things. So I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I said previously that I started working for medical communications companies in around 2013, and I started working for a major pharmaceutical company that I mentioned just before. And from that, I started to visit the United States more. Going to little events here and there, wherever I would be in the US, whether that's in a dark, dingy hotel in Illinois somewhere when I've been snowed in, or in Pittsburgh, or in all various places where I've got out there. And what I've found is that the tech scene is a little different over there. It's a little easier, I feel, to be able to talk about your aspiration and about you really want to build things. There is and I say this as a British person, there is a thing in British culture where there's a little difference between, if you're doing well in Britain, you want to lower it down a bit. That's not the case in the US. If you're doing well, you'll say, hey, I've just done this and I made this and it's great. To us British, that often will sound narcissistic and sometimes will sound braggadocious. But in the US, it's not, and that does them a lot of benefits in terms of being able to actually get out there and sell. So that's a cultural difference that I found over there, and that's not something that necessarily I'd want to change. I think there's benefits in the way in which we do things in Britain, and I don't think that's something that's a big deal, but it did help me in a way to be able to promote what I do in there. The British accent helps a lot as well when you're when you're over there to actually get something done. But yeah, in terms of the competitiveness of the UK, our bones are good, and I am so proud that I'm from these islands. I really am. This is my home, and it is a shame about what has happened probably in the last 15 years and seeing the decline and the way in which that's happened. One of the first things, obviously was with IR35. We were promised reform many, many times, and that has caused a mass exodus of contractor talent to leave the industry or to have to change the way that they work because the government has been hostile to the way in which contractors make their money. So IR35, that the Conservatives promised to get rid of it and they didn't, and Labour's not going to get rid of it regardless because it's outside of their fundamental philosophy, and they're not going to do that. So that was one of the first hits, I think, to talent within the UK.
And just for people who aren't aware of IR35, it's a piece of tax legislation that was designed initially, I think, to ensure that people who were put as contractors would pay an equal amount of tax, because there was a sort of a way in which you could have an employee, but then ask them to be a contractor in order that both the employer and the employee would not pay as much tax. So it was aimed to try and close a loophole. But as Kevin, as you were saying, it's ended up dragging down the whole contractor market, made it very difficult to get the right talent. And so that's why people have been wanting to reform it. But I just wanted to kind of try and explain a bit of the context.
Thank you for the context. Definitely.
But carry on.
But yeah, that's something that happened in the 2010s. I started to notice that being a contractor was a little bit more difficult. So some people pivoted into being full-time, or they changed the way in which they work. That wasn't the overall death knell to it. Taxes are high in the UK. We know that. We talk about that consistently, and that would be fantastic if we got representative services for it, but we don't. In the United Kingdom, my healthcare is better in the US. It is. I get much superior healthcare because I have to pay for it in the US if I was there. And that's a fundamental problem. But people will say, "Oh, but you have to pay so much more in the US." Let me just tell you the difference between like the average salaries in the UK and the US. A general software engineer in the UK might earn about £50,000. In the US, they'll earn about £132,000, 70 to 132, depending on which grade they're in. An ML researcher can earn $500,000 to $800,000 in the US. And these salaries are unheard of in the UK. People just don't earn anywhere near as much as that. So when you've got all of those potential earnings, and when the taxation in the US is much lower compared to what it is in Britain. So for example, I think if an employee is earning about £100,000 in the UK, then the overall tax rate in the UK might be around 31.4 thousand. And then you've got the drag as well as you go to £100,000 and you start to lose your tax-free allowance, and you start to get up to this, it becomes like a weird 60%, doesn't it? When you start to get that is so off-putting, and the fiscal drag that we've had because the tax rates have never changed. All of these things compound and make you feel like the government isn't on your side. They don't want you to succeed because of all of these different pressures. And then when it gets worse with the UK, and I'll spin this to a positive thing in a second. Don't worry, it's all negative.
Yeah.
When it gets worse in the UK, when we start to have legislation that punishes employers and makes us feel like we're irresponsible, and they put legislation in that allows people to be able to have maternity leave from day one, paternity leave from day one, those sorts of things, which, why would I do that? Why would I risk that when I can employ anywhere around the world? And the UK is not special anymore for that talent. It's there everywhere. I can employ in the United States, I can employ in the Philippines, I can do all of that and not have to jump through those bureaucratic hurdles. I wouldn't have to do that. There's so much friction to harvesting good talent within the UK. But here's the best thing about it though. There's a positive about this. All of this can be changed. The bones of the UK are strong, and we've got great universities. We do have good infrastructure and ways to be able to change these things. But the reframing needs to be from the government, that we need to look at who actually provides the money to pay the taxes. And that is business and the private sector. And they need to be on our side, not just in words, but with actions. And those actions need to actually come all the way down and make us feel that Britain is competitive. They need to work on energy. They need to work on, our industrial energy is this. I think it's the second in the world. I think Germany's a little bit more expensive than us. I think it's £168 per megawatt hours for industrial electricity. I think, but it's too expensive. They need to work on that. They really do. And I know there's been efforts and there's been talking about it, but it's urgent because right now we're in a gold rush. And if we miss this opportunity, we will never recover. We will not recover if we don't catch up. The only benefit is that we're probably doing a little bit better than Europe, which is fine.
Yeah.
But we never used to be like that. 30 years ago, I believe, and don't quote me on this too much, although it is being recorded, our economy was bigger than China and India's. What happened? What happened? Why did we decline so much?
Yeah.
But the bones are there in the UK, and I am hopeful that all of these things can be resolved with sensible government and fiscal policy.
Yeah, we've touched upon some really big topics there. I think you're right though, and this is one of the things which increasingly the fundamental challenges for the industry, the AI industry, are the same as for every industry. They're business challenges. They're the ones you've highlighted there. That we can go on all we like about the research and the talent and the infrastructure, but fundamentally, if there's too high taxes, then we're not going to be able to hire, and we're not going to be able to invest in our own businesses and get the investment we want in our businesses, and we're not going to be able to grow. And even if we were, then our customers who we're trying to sell to aren't either, because they're going to be in exactly the same position. They're just bigger. So it is coming to that state now where I think these are fundamental challenges that we as the AI industry share. And we're very much sort of calling on the government to recognise this, not just for our industry, but more broadly than that. But, I like the way you phrased it, that we've got good bones in the UK, because I think you're right. And maybe that has been the opportunity over the last couple of decades, where we have had some sluggish productivity, but we have invested in some of that human and physical infrastructure that will be the basis of future growth. But now we just need to unleash how we're going to do that. We're kind of running out of time. We've had an amazing conversation here, but just to wrap things up, I wanted to find out, how can we stay in touch with you, find out more about the business and see how things develop?
Oh, absolutely. So my company's website is drutek.com, drutek.com. My name's Kevin Coyle, if you've forgotten about it already, and you can contact me at kevin@drutek.com.
Fantastic. And what are the things you've got coming up over the next couple of months, couple of years? Are there any sort of big innovations that you can share with us, or should we just kind of track you on?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. So Drutek is arranging training for this democratization of AI and this harvest principle. We're doing training sessions within the northwest of England and in Austin as well. So if anyone's in Austin, please do do book that. We're also launching our tool called Spectral, which is the AI-powered design system workspace application. So that has gone into private beta now, and we're doing quite well with some signups for that. I'll link that. I guess I can link that somewhere as well. It's spectral.design, but spectral spelled with a K.
We'll put that underneath there on the screen. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, Kevin, that's been really fascinating. We've covered such a lot of ground. It's been really educational, actually, to talk around design systems. I must admit, I'm kind of aware of the UX in product design, but the way you've kind of articulated this as a whole new discipline that really sort of brings in all of these decision-making processes into a context that they can then be used within AI-powered workflows. That was fascinating. But also, I love that funnel approach that you gave us of thinking about how we kind of bring all these decisions together and we bring people in for the entire organization with all of their ideas, give them the tools, enable them to come up with these ideas and then pick the best and finesse that and keep using AI powered solutions to really drive that innovation. So it's both democratization but also really deep insight. And then we got onto fixing the world.
I'm sorry about that.
No,
very passionate about
honestly,
that.
It's all good, I can tell, but it is. I mean, it's so fundamental to what we are as business and entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
This is our bread and butter. So thank you for articulating it. It's something that needs to be discussed more often. And I think we're at an inflection point now. So we're a few days away from hearing formally that Andy Burnham's been made Prime Minister, and I think there'll be a lot of proof in the pudding to understand what that means on so many different levels, and whether some of the points you've raised, I'm sure, will come into very sharp focus as people start to ask the questions about what can we do to ensure that the UK leads economically. So all of those very, very relevant.
Very helpful.
Kevin, yeah. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for your time. It's been great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Don't miss the next episode. Subscribe now. UKAI is the trade association for businesses across the UK. Tech and non-tech, large and small. AI is our business. Find out more at ukai.co.